Welcome everyone to the last webinar of the 25-26 school year. As you can see from our title page, it is all about Checkpoint B, and the focus today is presentational communication. After doing the other two modes, it is now time to talk about that communication mode. So, as you are probably used to, here's our lovely team. We have Lou Baskinger from Madrid, apparently. We have the lovely Dana. We have Lucille and myself, Suaz, or Francoise Perron. And our director, Greg Smith, is here as well. So today we're going to talk about, well, as usual, there's always an overview of our OHM Checkpoint B exams and how they compare to the state in terms of the breakdown of the percentages. And as I mentioned, we're going to focus on presentational writing with a real emphasis on our draft rubric, which we will kind of take apart for you. And then we have some sample marker responses from students that we have used and scored, and that will demonstrate for you to give you a sense of what that looks like. And then if we have time at the very end, there will be some Q&As, as we always do. So for our ASL colleagues, as you can see on the slide, we currently do not have any guidelines from NYSED. We are very much hoping to get some over the summer, or at the very least at the very beginning of the next school year. They should be coming anytime, but unfortunately, it is not for today.
Thank you very much, Swaz. I'm going to take us through just a very brief overview of our exams. So Checkpoint B exams are available in 5 languages. We create exams in both January and June each year. In January, we have Checkpoint B exams in French, Italian, and Spanish. And in June, we offer Checkpoint A and B exams in all 5 languages. Our exams are aligned to the New York State Learning Standards for World Languages and adhere to the principles and guidelines for adopting or creating locally developed benchmark assessments for Checkpoint B. And more information about our exams can be found on our website. Here you can find sample prompts, you can find the manuals for administration and scoring, recordings of our past webinars, and so much more information. So please go ahead and check out our website when you get a chance. This is a timeline for the implementation of the new state standards for world languages. So as you can see here, these standards were adopted back in March of 2021, and they have been gradually implemented across the years and into the curriculum and for each level. So you can see Checkpoint A, the first exam that was aligned to these new standards and guidelines was administered in June of 2025. For Checkpoint B, all the new exams need to be aligned by 2027. And so our January 2027 exam is going to be the first exam that follows this new format, standards, and guidelines from the state. Here you can see a comparison of the New York State standards and our OHM BOCES Checkpoint B exams. So once again, just as a reminder, we don't have any guidelines at this time for ASL Checkpoint B. So the format that you see here is for modern languages other than ASL. On the left-hand side, we have the state guidelines. And so the state mandates that for interpretive communication, you need to have 40%. Interpersonal communication must be 30%. And presentational communication must be 30% as well. You notice that there are some choices that you can make. So, for example, in the interpretive communication, there is a choice for how many points you want to put into reading versus how many you want to put into listening. If you want more information about interpretive communication or the interpersonal communication parts of our exams, we do have previous webinars that we have hosted on these sections of the exam, and they are available on our website. Today, we're going to be focusing, though, on presentational communication, which, as you see, the guidelines require that we have 30% of our exam be presentational communication. We do have a choice. The state does allow for you to do presentational speaking for up to 10 points. But if you look on the right-hand side at our OHM exams, we have decided not to do a presentational speaking. All 30 of our points will be in presentational writing. And we're going to go through today and introduce and show you how we're going to allocate those points. So we're going to go ahead and move on. And I believe Lou is going to introduce presentational communication.
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so presentational communication. Dana has shown you and told you what we have decided on doing. So let's go to our next slide. For presentational communication, we are going to allow 30%. The student will accomplish 2 tasks. Each task will be 15 points, and there will be options for both Part 4A and Part 4B. Students are provided 2 prompts for each task, and they must choose one from each to complete. Part 4A is an email task, okay? And students will compose an email that meets the requirements of the task and addresses the prompt. There will be 2 possibilities that they will select one to do. Something to point out about very important to point out about the email is that it is not a read to write task. So those of you who are familiar with our previous examinations, students had to read an email and respond to it. That is no longer going to be the case in 2027. It is just an email that the students compose. Part 4B, a free response task, students compose a response that meets the requirement of the task and addresses the prompt. And through this, students demonstrate their abilities to describe, inform, narrate, explain, or persuade. And that will be marked on the test question as to what they are to do. For modern languages, for presentational writing, okay, Part 4A, this task is worth 15 points again. The student chooses between 2 email prompts to complete, and the student composes an email that completes the task and addresses the chosen prompt. Okay. For and again, it's no longer read to write. Part 4B, this also is worth 15 points, and the student will choose between a text-based prompt or a picture-based prompt. And the student again composes a response that completes the task and addresses the prompt. Sounds kind of redundant, but all of this is to be consistent as to what the student is doing from task to task. Okay, and let's move to the next. Now, I mentioned describe, inform, narrate, explain, and persuade. Of course, these are the language functions established by New York State. And they are, as you know, they will be on our exam at various points to tell you exactly what the student is to do. Okay? Our exam is basically based on intermediate level. Intermediate mid, where a student can say, I can narrate personal experiences. I can present information. I can state and support a viewpoint on a variety of familiar, concrete, and research topics using sentences and a series of connected sentences through spoken, written, or signed language. And for intermediate low, I can present information about my life and activities, state and make attempts to support preferences and opinions on familiar and everyday topics by creating and using simple sentences through spoken, written, or signed language. Now, it is important to note for our category 1 and 2 languages, the target is intermediate mid. We're all striving for that target, but passing is really set at intermediate low. For our category 3 and 4, which today we're talking about our Chinese, okay, our target is intermediate low, and our passing is at novice high because of the difficulty of the language as deemed by New York State.
I'm going to talk today about our sample prompts. We have several sample prompts that are going to show exactly what the task is going to look like to the student when they read the card. All right. So the first one is going to be part 4A, which is an email task. And Lou has already stated that the email task is not a read to write as it has been in the past. This is simply the creation of an email, or I should say the initiation of an email by a student to whomever the task is telling them to write. If you look up in the right-hand corner, you're going to see that this task is saying persuade. Lou has already outlined for you the different language functions, which you're going to hear us talk about multiple times throughout the afternoon. I'm going to give them to you again, just as memory, and hopefully by the time this is over, you will have remembered most of them. Describe, inform, narrate, explain, and persuade. So this is the last one, persuade. So if you look at the option 1, it says, what do I need to do to earn full credit? This is for the student. This is what the teacher needs to explain to the student in the fact that without these components, without these bullets, they are not going to receive full credit. So address all the parts of the prompt. Our prompts for OHM BOCES have parts. They must address both parts. That's critical. If they don't, there will be penalties to be paid under the completion of task. And I believe it's Dana who's going to explain that to you in a little bit. Next is writing complete sentences, not phrases. This is checkpoint B. So we're looking for complete sentences. Organization of your ideas, not a helter-skelter, not just writing down whatever thoughts just come into your mind, but rather organizing them with some element of a flow. Providing details or elaboration, and then using a wide range of vocabulary. Throughout the course of the year, we stress different vocabulary for each unit, and it should be something that we as teachers are constantly doing, is recycling that vocabulary for the student, that the vocabulary that they've learned from September is carried over to October, November, December, etc. So our task, what is the task? The task is to write an email as the initiator of the email. And the prompt it's two-pronged. It has 2 parts to it. So I'm going to read this one to you. Your target language host brother would like to go out for dinner tonight. He has sent you an advertisement for a new restaurant in town. Write a response to let him know your opinion in your email. Number 1, tell him what you think about about eating at this particular restaurant, and 2, give reasons for your opinion. Those are the two parts that we need to stress to students they must accomplish. They first have to give them their ideas, their own personal opinion, and then the reason for their opinion. So down below under suggestions, what you're going to notice is that there's a word may, capitalized. These are suggestions that OHM is giving to the student. They are not requirements. They are simply suggestions. We might consider it as a springboard. They can look at them, choose to use them, not choose to use them, choose to use some. It's entirely up to the student. But it does give them some element of structure that they can think about before writing their actual response. You're going to notice that there is a picture. That picture is not a requirement to use within the email. It's simply a springboard. It's telling them, oh, this is a prompt about a restaurant. It's kind of reminding them it's a restaurant that we're talking about. So the student has a visual as well as the print to be able to realize I'm talking about a restaurant and I want an opinion on this restaurant. Okay, got it. So in the bottom left-hand corner, you're going to see in a box, it says you are encouraged to write at least 7 to 10 sentences. You may refer to the image in your response. However, it is not required to do so. But some students might like to refer to that image. One of the things that we need to remind students is that it's all up to them as to what they write about, so long as they accomplish the prompt. And that prompt is twofold. What is your personal opinion and what are your reasons why? Okay, so we're going to go on to the next one and we're going to leave the email task and we're going to go to part 4B, which is the free response task, which is text-based. In this response, if you look in the upper right-hand corner in the black box, it says inform. So let's go back. Let's go back to describe, inform, narrate, explain, and persuade. Those are the language functions. So they're always going to change. Task. You're going to write a response in the target language to address the prompt. The prompt, twofold. There's part 1 and part 2. They may do one part only exceedingly well, but they will not receive full credit, particularly for under the completion of task. So this prompt is, your school's target language newspaper is looking for submissions about celebrations. Write an article about either a community activity or a family celebration in your article. Well, this is a double plus because now the student not only got to choose which card they wanted to do, as Lou explained earlier, but they also now get to choose in this particular prompt, do I want a celebration that's an activity, or do I want a celebration in my family? Their choice. You can see once again, we have suggestions. So suggestions are not mandatory. They are purely suggestions. If the student gets stuck, look at them. Or if you read those, you're going to say to yourself, well, this sets them up pretty well. Let's look at these. It says what the event is, when the event takes place, what happens during the event, who participates, why you like this event. It does, doesn't it? It sets it up pretty well for them to get a nice storyline. All right. They do not need to use the picture at all. But as you can see, this particular picture, we're talking about a newspaper and we're talking about school news. So it embeds into the student visually. That's what we're doing. We're talking about news. About what kind of news? About a celebration or an activity that is a community-based one. Let's go to the next slide. And when we go to the next slide, you're going to see a picture this time around, all right? And in this picture, you're going to look up in the top right-hand corner once again, and you're going to find your language function of narrate. Narrate is exactly that. It's not a dialogue, it's a story. And a story is what they need to write. So when I look at this picture, I could potentially think, oh, the mom says this, the dad says this. If that isn't dad, indeed mom and dad, or it could be an older brother or sister. You do not want a dialogue in any way, shape, or form. So we're going to show you a little bit about that in just a minute. But let's look again at the prompt. The prompt is saying, in your response, include the main points of your story and details that support your story. So there's an elaboration here to the story. You're going to have perhaps something that may have happened before, during, and maybe even after this picture. So the student is free to bounce out of the picture, in the picture, and out of the picture. But they must have what's in the picture as part of their story. Okay. Again, we're looking for 7 to 10 sentences. And there's always a section of suggestions where they may include whatever happens to be in that box. It's not necessary, but it is there for their benefit. Let's go to the next slide. So a lot of times teachers will say, well, exactly what are we looking for when we talk about a story? A story involves characters. It's perfectly fine and encouraged for them to name the characters. Who is in this picture? Where is it located? Where is it taking place? What is the progression of events? What's currently happening in the picture? Well, maybe I want to know some background information, so I might include what was happening before the picture. Or I might want to include what's going to happen after the picture. What's also important is the flow of that student's ideas. So here's where we have connections. Sentences that flow well one into the other. When we were in checkpoint A, we had a description. A story is not a description. A story is just that. It's telling a story. So there is connection between one thought to the next thought. And teachers are training students. All right, what happened first? What happened second? There's a sequence of events. So you have logical connections that may involve some transition words if the student so chooses. But one of the important things to remember to tell the student is that all of the above involves or should involve elaboration and details. So that's the big move from checkpoint A to checkpoint B. Next slide, please. So for all of the prompts for part 4, this is a recap. We have 2 aspects to complete. There's always 2 parts to the prompt. The second thing is we do not any longer have a word count. We eliminated a word count altogether. But we are recommending that the students write a minimum of 7 to 10 sentences. And I think for those of you who are veteran teachers, you know that we have had students in the past at this level write more than that. If you know your class can write more, then encourage them to write more. We certainly want to prepare them as best we can for the upcoming checkpoint C, level C classes. The next is there's 5 target language functions. The tasks will include all of them, and the student is picking 2 cards. They might be fortunate and pick 2 that they like. They might have 2 for describe, or they might have 2 for persuade, or they might have 1 of each, of different ones. That's the luck of the draw, all right? The next is all of the tasks represent the themes and the topics that were revised by New York State in 2021. These are those topics that we've been working with, which seem to be forever, from September on up. And they are all based on relatable life experiences that seem to be universal. That's our goal. Okay, I'm going to turn you over at this point to our next person, who is going to be Swaz, and she is going to talk to you a little bit more about the presentational communication and how it's scored.
Thank you, Lucille. So this is the part of the webinar where we're going to get into the nitty-gritty, and you will actually see the rubric that we have toiled upon for a while now. And so a reminder that you have to grade or rate the student work holistically, right? So we would recommend that you read the entire response and get a general feel for if they accomplished the task. Is it flowing? How well is it written? And then you can go into the rubric dimension by dimension and look at it a little bit more precisely. But it's really a holistic kind of a process. And so reminders, as Lou mentioned earlier, the proficiency levels are intermediate mid, which would be the target, intermediate low, which would still be passing, and then we have below intermediate proficiency, which means really the student is working at checkpoint A level. Okay, and so you will notice this is just a small screenshot, but you will notice that there are four levels at the top for completion of task, and they are proficiency based. And then we have 3 dimensions with a different point system, and we're going to look at that a little bit more in details in a minute. So the dimensions are completion of task, which is the gateway dimension. If they don't accomplish it, you do not rate any longer, and they get a 0, unfortunately. And then we have comprehensibility and control of language, discourse and vocabulary, which those 3 should look very familiar because they were similar to the interpersonal. And then we have this new dimension specifically for presentational, which is organization. And also a reminder that for category 3 and 4, the intermediate low and the novice high and novice mid are the 3 levels in terms of target and passing. So the next slide will show you the rubric a little bit more clearly. It should look familiar because of the similarity with checkpoint A. I want to attract your attention on the very top of it. You'll notice that it says student name, and then there are boxes and things to check off and to fill in. And so what that means is that for each presentational task that a student does, you have to use a separate form, such as this, to rate the student work and indicate if they did the email or the free response, if it was a 4A or 4B, etc. And then you can see the point system I was referring to. So for completion of task, it goes 6, 4, 2, 0 if they did not meet. And then the 3 dimensions that Dana's going to go into details in a minute yield points of 3 for intermediate mid, 2 for intermediate low, and if it's below, it's a 1 or possibly even a 0 if they did not complete the task.
Okay, so I'm going to go through each of the dimensions of the rubric in more detail, starting with completion of task. So as was mentioned, this is what we consider a gateway dimension. And so as such, it is worth twice as much as the other parts on the rubric, the other dimensions. And our reasoning behind that is, what is the purpose of learning a language but to communicate? The communicative function is the most important thing. Is the student able to communicate? Can they get their point across? So we have here completes the task at 6 points, partially completes the task at 4, and then minimally completes the task at 2. And a student does have to earn at least 2 points in order to be graded on the rest of the dimensions. So if they do not at least minimally complete the task, then you do unfortunately have to give them a 0 for the whole task. So to receive full credit, to get that complete task, if we take a look at that, It says that the student completes the task by using the targeted language function to compose a response that clearly addresses all aspects of the prompt by including many details and or showing development. So we have a couple of different parts here. The first is that the student needs to address all aspects of the prompt. And as Lucille mentioned, each prompt does have 2 different aspects. So they do have to complete more than one thing. They do need to use the language function to do this. So if we're writing a story, they don't want to just describe the story, describe the picture, they need to narrate. And then the other part of this is that they should include many details and or show development in their response. And what do we mean by development? Students can do this in a variety of different ways. They can offer supporting details, descriptions, explanations, reasons. They can give examples. They can make comparisons. So students can decide how they want to do this, but these are the kinds of things that we are looking for completion of task. So that's the first one, and these are the same for category 1, 2, and for category 3, 4. You notice we don't have a proficiency level tied to these. They are just completes, partially completes, and minimally completes. So moving on to the next dimension, we have comprehensibility and control of language. So in this, we're looking at how well is the student understood and how accurately is the student's message communicated. Now for this one here, we do have 2 different rubrics. The one that is shown here is the category 1, 2. So we have that intermediate mid is our target and the intermediate low is our passing. If you do teach a category 3, 4 language, you can pull up the category 3, 4 rubric, but you'll notice that the intermediate low is going to be the one that is at the top there and the novice high will be in the middle. So for comprehensibility and control of language, we are looking at the intermediate mid-level. We are looking that the student can be understood by someone who is used to communicating with intermediate level learners. Accuracy is apparent with original language in the present, but may decrease in other time frames. Errors do not interfere with comprehensibility. So at this level, you're looking for students to be understood by someone used to communicating with intermediate level learners. So we're not looking for if you drop the student off in another country, would any person be able to understand what they're saying? No, we're looking for people that are used to communicating with intermediate level learners. Who is that? Teachers are pretty used to communicating with intermediate level learners. So that's the first thing we're looking for. Can they be understood? Now, on top of that, we are also looking at the checkpoint B level. We're looking more at accuracy. So at the checkpoint A level, if you teach checkpoint A, accuracy really is comprehensibility. If they're understood, it's accurate enough. At the checkpoint B level, however, we are looking that students are a little more precise with their language. They don't have to be perfect. So as you can see here for the intermediate mid, we're looking for the student to be accurate with their original language in the present tense. So if they dip into other time frames, if they are using past tense or the future, different tenses, they might be a little bit less accurate. But in the present, they should have good command over that. Looking down at the different levels, you'll notice for the below intermediate proficiency, we also talk about memorized language. So we have original language and memorized language. So memorized language are those really beginner building blocks of language learning. They are the phrases, the expressions, formulaic language like I like, where the student just has to fill in the end of the sentence. I like pizza, I like shopping. These kind of things are memorized language. This is checkpoint A more, where at checkpoint B, we're really looking for students to start combining and adapting this memorized language to create new sentences, new meaning, to elaborate on these basic short phrases. So that's what we mean when we say original language. And at the mid, again, accuracy is apparent with the original language in the present, but may decrease in other time frames. And then finally, the last part on here is about comprehensibility. So we do still believe that this is an important part. At the intermediate mid-level, the errors are not interfering. They make mistakes, especially again when they're in other time frames, but you can still understand what they're saying, even with those mistakes. Down at the intermediate low level, sometimes the errors are interfering. Once in a while, you're not quite sure if they're saying one thing or something else. And then at the below intermediate proficiency, they often interfere, or sometimes you're not even sure what they're saying because it impedes your comprehensibility. So that's comprehensibility and control of language. Our third dimension is discourse and vocabulary. So here we're looking at two different things. We're looking at the type of language that students use, and we're looking at the specific vocabulary or words that the student is using in their response. So at the intermediate mid-level, students use elaborated sentences and some strings of sentences. They have a variety of intermediate vocabulary at various points in the response. Looking down to the intermediate low, which is our passing, or for category 3-4, this is your target, the student is going to use elaborated sentences, and intermediate vocabulary is introduced at various points. They don't have a variety, but they do still have some intermediate vocabulary. Down at below intermediate, anything below that, so it could be that the student is only using simple sentences that you would see at checkpoint A. Or it could be that they're using phrases or single words, and the vocabulary is a lot more basic. So there are some terms in here that we would like to clarify. So we have elaborated sentences and strings of sentences are both things that come up. Elaborated sentences are when you take a very simple, basic sentence, like I play basketball, and you add information to that sentence. So I play basketball with my friends would be an example of an elaborated sentence. You could do a lot of different things. It could be longer than this, but this is one way that you could do it. When we get into strings of sentences, we are looking for sentences that have some kind of connection between them. You know, when it's nice weather, I play basketball with my friends at the park. After the game, we go out for pizza at our favorite restaurant. We like to spend time together. So this is a string of sentences. They go together. And then the second part, like we mentioned, is the variety of vocabulary. We're looking for a variety of intermediate vocabulary. We want vocabulary that relates to the prompt. It shouldn't be pulled out of nowhere and have nothing to do with anything. They can't memorize, you know, the dictionary and write it down as their response and get credit for that. And we do want to see it introduced at various points in the response. So, you know, you don't want to have one sentence at the very beginning with lots of cool vocabulary, and then the rest of the sentences is just basic novice vocabulary that they learned in checkpoint A. So we'd like to see it throughout the whole response. Now, of course, novice vocabulary is also going to be included. It has to be, but we do want to see a little bit more of that checkpoint B vocabulary as well. And finally, we're going to talk about organization. So this is the dimension that is new for the writing. It's not included on the interpersonal speaking. And here we're looking at how does a student organize ideas. At the intermediate mid, the student is predominantly demonstrates organization and a logical flow of ideas through the use of strategies such as sequencing, grouping of ideas, expressions of time, conjunctions, and or transitional words. So notice it does say they predominantly demonstrate organization. It doesn't have to be perfect. There may be some things that are out of place, but as a whole, it mostly is organized. And it does show a logical flow. Strategies that students can use, we listed a whole bunch. They don't have to use any specific strategies. Different prompts might lend themselves to different strategies. Students might feel more comfortable with different strategies. So they can choose how they organize. They just have to make sure that there is organization. At the intermediate low, the student is generally demonstrating organization. It's mostly logical. There's some more things that are out of place, but there is a structure to what they are writing. And then at the below intermediate proficiency, it's very minimally organized. It could be that it is just a list of things that are not connected, or it could be that they just wrote the first thing that came to mind, and then they wrote the second thing that came to mind, and then they went back to the first thing. It could be all over the place, but there's not very much organization there at all. So these are our dimensions. And now we're going to kind of move along and talk more about some student samples. So I'm going to hand this back over to Lou, who's going to talk about our Spanish student sample.
We were lucky enough, as Dana said, to have some student samples, and actually they're only about a month old. So these are students that are very close to taking their Checkpoint B examination next month. So we think that they are very representative of what students can do. This particular task, okay, and sample comes from, it's a part 4B. And the task was to compose a response in Spanish that appropriately addresses the prompt. And our prompt was, your school's Spanish newspaper is looking for submissions about celebrations. Write an article about either a community activity or a family celebration. In your article, number 1, introduce the celebration and provide details about the event. So those are the 2 parts of our prompt. I'm going to read to you what the student thinks he or she wrote. Okay? ¿Tú quieres pasar tiempo con los amigos? En la escuela nosotros tenemos una baile en el 15 de mayo. Es en el gimnasio y el café. ¿Quieres tu música? Visita señor Smith en cuarto 246 para recomendaciones. Todos los estudiantes y profesores pueden ir a la baile. Más comidas es gratis por todas las personas. Okay, so everyone take a minute. Those of you who understand Spanish, read it again to yourselves. Check to see if they've introduced the celebration and if they have provided details about the event. For those of you who don't understand Spanish, here is a translation into English. Words in brackets represent that there's some sort of error in the actual language. I'll give you a minute to look at that. If you have the rubric in front of you, if you were downloaded it, you can begin to score it. Looking at this, and again, our function was to inform. The team decided, as we looked at this, that the completion of task was a 6. Because the student clearly addressed both aspects. We know about the community, we know what the community activity is, and we also have details about it. Okay? We know that it is this celebration, and we know where it's taking place, when it's taking place, and we know there's free food, which will bring a lot of us to it. Okay, then we look at the comprehensibility and control, and we felt that this is an intermediate low. Accuracy is consistent, and the student can be mostly understood. And errors occasionally interfere with comprehensibility. as we looked at this, we saw that there was some confusion because we believe that the student wants to say, come visit Mr. Smith. But what we find is we don't know exactly if that's what the student wants. We also have some, well, confusion as to what is the very last sentence. Is it more foods, many foods, but foods? And so we did feel that it was an intermediate low for comprehensibility and control of language. For discourse and vocabulary, again, we thought it was in the category, in the realm of the 2 on our rubric. Okay. We found that the vocabulary was a little shy, a little weak at times. Okay. And then, but the student for organization did a great job. When we read this student, we have this flow of the ideas. Although the student didn't use any conjunctions, although the student didn't have time expressions, first, last, next, etc., the student has composed this passage, this response, with the flow of those ideas, one moving from one to the other. So the student received a total score, a holistic score of 13 points out of the possible 15. The student did a really nice job on this.
Okay, the next sample is in the French language, as you can see. This is also a free response from 4B, but as you can see, there's an image, and students should be writing a story, emphasis on the word story, about it. So the task says, in French, write a story about the scene in the picture below. And as we have been emphasizing many times, there are 2 prongs to this. So the prompt says, in your response, include 1, the main points of your story, general idea, and 2, some details to support said story. Okay, so look at that lovely image again. I'm going to be reading the text as is in French. Follow along if you can, or you can see the English below. Le famille regarde un télé aujourd'hui. La mère et le garçon et tenir du nutrition. Ils ont dans un living, dans un fauteuil grand. Le père est brune, mais la mère est blonde. Mais le garçon est brune aussi. Il ne boit pas d'eau ou du soda. La mère est content avec leur mère et garçon. Ils adorent regarder un télé à la nuit avant dormir. Okay, so as Lou did, let's give you about a minute to rate this using the rubric, and then we will show you our results. Okay, so we'll take it dimension by dimension as well. So for completion of the task, out of 6, we gave 4 points because we felt that the student does attempt to tell the story, but there's an awful lot of sentences. There are many sentences that are just plain description. And since the language function is narrate, they should really be telling a story with details, right? So there's a lot of description, and there are actually very few details that even support their story. The few details that we saw were things like there's today, we know it's happening today, there's watching TV, we know how the mom feels, and they love to watch TV before sleep, but the rest is all description. So a 4 out of 6 for partially completing the task. Then for comprehensibility and control of language, we felt it was very weak. It's actually below intermediate, hence the 1, because there is memorized language, which of course is a trademark of checkpoint A. And most of it is understandable, but again, limited and definitely a little below level. The present time frame, there's nothing else but present tense. And the present time frame has really limited control. Things like is watch instead of watches, and there's no infinitive, they love watch, etc. So that's very weak. And some errors even interfere or impede with comprehensibility, such as talking about the mayor. We think they want to say husband, but because it's misspelled, it looks like that's the mom and the mayor, and that definitely brings some confusion. The discourse and the vocab, there's some attempts to elaborate, but it's not super successful. And it's really not at an intermediate level as far as the vocabulary choices. So we figured it was a 2 for an intermediate low. So they're not quite as low as the comprehensibility and control, but definitely not at an intermediate mid-level. And then the organization is really weak as well. It's kind of all over the place, listing things more than having a flow and a story and things happening in a sequence. There's a little bit of grouping of ideas, but again, very limited. And what really convinced us to give a 1 on this is that if you reorganize this text, right, and put the sentences in a totally different order, you would get the same result. So there really is no flow and no connection between the ideas. So once this was all accomplished, we ended up with 8 points out of the 15 for this French task. And now we're going to move on with Italian. And Lucille has the floor.
All right. First of all, look at our language function. This one is to persuade. Your Italian host brother would like to go out for dinner tonight. He has sent you an advertisement for a new restaurant in town. Write an email response to let him know your opinion. In your email, tell him what you think about eating at this restaurant and give reasons for your opinion. Ciao, fratelli, tu vuoi i pesci? Io non mi piace la verdura e la torta. Mi piacciono pesce perché è molto deliziosi. Il ristorante in noi molto caro. Io ho lavorato 8 ore. If you look at the English, they're very simple, very basic sentences. We'll give you another minute or so. All right, as you look at this, you may have guessed that it was going to be graded rather poorly. The student only minimally addresses one aspect of the prompt, and that is that the restaurant is not expensive. The rest is basically opinions on the part of the writer as to his personal preferences, that he likes fish, he likes vegetables, he likes cake, and he thinks fish is delicious. It's more of his opinion on fish versus anything else. Because it was minimally executed, we gave it a 2. And we wanted to make sure that we impress upon teachers the importance of telling students it's a 2-pronged task. And without both prongs, you do not have full completion. So it's an impossibility to get a 6 unless you've completed both parts of that task. And this is not a 4 because it was so minimally addressed. Comprehensibility and control of language. There's memorized language here, all right, but it lacks accuracy. And there's limited control of gender and number agreement. For example, the word ristorante, it is not la ristorante, it's il ristorante. So the gender is off. There are gender errors here as well. Next, under discourse and vocabulary, the student has many errors with simple sentences. And the sentences are mainly subject, verb, object. There's very little elaboration or extension of vocabulary that they've learned in checkpoint B. And then there's organization, again, a 1. The student response is minimally organized. There's a lack of connections between the sentences. They're pretty isolated sentences. And there is some grouping of sentences with I like fish, I also like vegetables, etc. So you can see just a little bit of the grouping, but overall, this was a poor example of what we're looking for at checkpoint B level.
Sure. So I'm going to take us through the last example, which is a Chinese example. For this one, you do want to remember that this is a category 3-4 language. So the way that we're grading it is going to be a little bit different. What we're looking for, our target is going to be intermediate low with this one, and our passing is going to be novice high. So this one is the same prompt as the last one. So for this one, your Chinese host brother would like to go out for dinner tonight and sent you an advertisement for the new restaurant in town. Again, same as before, we want the student to give the opinion about this restaurant and reasons for their opinion. So the student writes, 你好，小白，我喜欢吃中国菜，我要吃中国的汤，我要去北京店，因为我听北京的菜很好吃。我要吃辣的菜，因为我喜欢吃辣的菜。我不喜欢吃甜的菜。这个星期一，我要去北京店。So if you don't understand Chinese, so they are saying, hello, 小白. I like to eat Chinese food. I want to eat Chinese soup. I want to go to Beijing shop or restaurant because I listen. Beijing food is delicious. I want to eat spicy food because I like to eat spicy food. I do not like to eat sweet food. This Monday, I want to go to Beijing shop or restaurant. So again, the things that are included in brackets means that something is incorrect. Either they used the wrong vocabulary word or maybe the character was written incorrectly. We don't have spelling in Chinese. We have the way the characters are written. So I'm going to give you just a minute to kind of look through this, and then we'll go over the scoring. Okay, so taking a look at our scoring, if you remember, category 3-4 language, so we are looking for that intermediate low level. So for this one, starting with completion of task, we did give this one a 6 for completes task. So they definitely do address both aspects of the prompt. They do say that they want to go to this restaurant and they make plans. They want to go on Monday. And they do give reasons and some details as well. I would like to have seen some more examples, maybe some specific dishes or maybe more reasons to go to the restaurant. But I did feel that when I looked at the response, that it leans more towards the 6 than it does to the 4. So that's another good point to bring up is if you are looking at a response and you can't decide which one, is it a 6? Is it a 4? Is it a 3? Is it a 2, right? You're going back and forth between these two. Think about which way does it lean? Does it lean more towards one direction or does it lean more towards another direction? And then you always want to err on the side of the student. So I did go with a 6 for completes task for this one. For comprehensibility and control of language, they can be mostly understood. They're accurate mostly with the memorized language, like the checkpoint A language. There definitely are some character mistakes in here that are written incorrectly. It's difficult to tell that they're saying Monday. I'm pretty sure that's what they mean based on me understanding a lot of intermediate, level students, level learners. They also use the wrong words a couple times for some different things and some incorrect characters. So I did give this one a novice high for comprehensibility and control of language. So mistakes do interfere, they don't impede, and they're not super accurate with all of their even memorized language. For discourse and vocabulary, I gave it a 3 for intermediate low. So the student does use elaborated sentences and even some strings of sentences, which would be at the intermediate mid-level. They do have some repeated vocabulary, but they do introduce intermediate vocabulary at various points in the response. So this one is an intermediate low. And then finally, for organization, it is generally organized. They use grouping of ideas, and they do have some simple conjunctions in there. They use because a couple of different times. So there is some decent organization for this. So again, intermediate low, we're looking that it is generally organized, which I think that this is. So overall, we gave this one a total of 14 out of 15 points. So pretty good for the student. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over. Lucio, yes?
Yeah, if you can go back.
Sure.
I just want to also touch upon the fact that this was one of the few of the samples that we received where you can see something as simple as a word that was learned in level 1 is carried over, and that's the word because. In the linking of two sentences, that's the elaboration that we're talking about. It doesn't have to be at checkpoint C level. This is clearly at checkpoint A level with the use of the because, but look at the score that this received in comparison to the others. Additionally, the Monday, this Monday, here's a time word. This is a transition word that is being used. That is a very good point in the right direction. So I think as a sample of what we're looking for, this is certainly something that I would say to students, it doesn't have to be a masterpiece, but it can still get you very high scores.
Actually, I want to kind of repeat what Lucille said. We were very happy once we saw some of the samples from our students. We were happy because we felt that the students did a good job, basically, without much training to take this examination. We also felt that our rubric, our draft rubric, really worked, and we really like. After 2 years of working on this rubric, we felt that it really is going to work and benefit for the student if the student is trained for the test. We did have some observations that teachers should keep in mind, and at some point next year our manual will come out and our samples will be in there. We will repeat much of what we've said today, but we will have some reminders. For example, a point that came up several times in the limited amount of samples that we had, the paragraph form. Perhaps it's because our direction said write at least 7 sentences. We had too many students write lists of sentences, either bulleted, as the example of the Italian, or we had some kids that actually wrote 1, 2, 3, 4 throughout in a list form. So we want to make sure that it's in paragraph form. So please help your students to keep that paragraph form. If they want to do it on a piece of paper before they put it on their exam booklet, fine. But this way, if they look at those 7 sentences, 10 sentences, whatever they write, they have to realize it needs to have that flow. So we really discourage people from writing in lists unless it's practice. We also think that our students should understand why the language function is there by the prompt. And that's to make sure that if after they sit to think about what they're going to write, make sure that they know that they're narrating or that they're informing, so that they make sure that they reach their purpose. And then something that we found too many students on the picture did not write story, but they actually tried to do a dialogue form. And we do not want students to have he said, she said, I said, mom said, dad said, repetition. It is a story. An occasional, if it's embedded in the story, a detail about he or she said something, that's fine, but not throughout the entire exercise. Does anybody want to join in anything about the prompts or say anything? Dana, do you have anything you'd want to add?
Can I just piggyback on, this is not on this, but going back to the samples that we presented, I love that Lou made the point that there was some very impressive writing samples that we received from the different schools and that we were able to use for this purpose. And I just want to remind people that we showed you a couple that were very weak because we wanted to show a variety of scoring. And you know how usually if it's a really stellar paper, it's actually very easy to rate, right? So we wanted to show you different levels of writing and also yeah, what the whole process is. So I appreciate that you reminded people that actually this does not necessarily represent the samples that we received, but we were very purposeful when we chose those as demos, basically.
So at this point, we'll kind of move on to our Q&A. I know Mr. Smith has been monitoring the Q&A and hopefully answering some of your questions already.
Yes,
Do you have
absolutely.
any?
There's definitely a lot of good questions that came up throughout the webinar. But to the questions, as I said, there was a number of very good questions. Even though I think the explanations you all gave on your respective slides were very well explained. It's a very complex topic, and obviously you had to do it from a 20,000-foot perspective, trying to give an overview of the process. And some of the questions were more micro in detail, and it's hard to hit everything. But nonetheless, great job, and some probing questions for you all to consider. The first one is in regard to the format of the test. Last fall, when we first presented our draft format, we presented that we were expecting to have an email read to write, but that has changed. And now we've decided to just have an email, as Lucille described, that's initiated by the student, but it includes a picture. So will there be a picture included, and what parameters are used to decide what the picture looks like, or what role does the picture play in said prompts?
The picture is there as a springboard. It is certainly not anything that needs to be included. The actual prompt is what the student needs to pay attention to, the two-pronged prompt. If they read the prompt and they answer the prompt, the picture is totally irrelevant. It's just there as an aid, as a visual to help them realize, remember what it is they're talking about.
Can I add that when the state presented about this, they made the point that an image very often can generate, just inspire a student and help them be more creative. So I like the word springboard that Lucille is using, but that's the purpose.
Mm-hmm. And I would add as well that we did move away from having an authentic resource as the picture. So there won't be anything like that. It'll be like the images you saw today. And it's just for a variety of reasons that we decided to move away from that. Yeah, so it'll be more in line with what you see today. So no authentic images or words on there. Just a springboard, a creative,
May I add something? Greg, you
Mhm.
mentioned about the read to write, and people
Mhm.
are questioning that
Well,
because
not questioning. It was more a
well,
question about
just
the picture itself,
right,
but if you have something additional to add about the read to write, then feel free.
sure. We really liked the read to write exercise that we had on our exams. However, now that this exam is all authentic material, finding an email written by not intended for testing, but intended to send that any one of us received an email, chances are it would not be at the level to appropriate levels for our examination. Also, because we try to keep consistency among the different languages, if we found one in French, it just might not be an equivalent. We couldn't find an equivalent in Chinese. And then we would also be rewriting these so they were no longer going to be authentic. So that's another rationale for us for changing and moving from our original decision.
Very
Okay?
good. Yeah, very helpful. Um, so another question in regard to or in association with the email prompt. And it kind of ties in more specifically to the example that we gave about the restaurant. It certainly could apply to other examples, but this question is specifically about the example that we used, the example prompt. And it's about how students may struggle, if you will, with giving an opinion about a menu that they actually don't have a chance to look at. Any thoughts or response to that?
I think by not providing the menu, actually, you're opening it up for the students' creativity. So they can talk about whatever they want. They can pretend it's the worst menu in the world and list all the things they don't like about it. They can pick any foods that they know and use that. So I think it's really an advantage to the student to have those options to use and to highlight what they know.
I agree. I think when you present a menu, the student may or may not know the vocabulary on that menu. When we don't present something, they are free to use what they know, and that helps them, I think.
Did anyone notice I guess when you saw the student responses for those students that responded to that particular prompt, any themes that indicate they might have struggled, or the reason why they may have not scored well was because they had difficulty in imagining or envisioning a menu?
No, I
Not that
don't
I
think.
noticed.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Lou.
No, and actually, the way the prompt was written, some students gave their opinion about going out to dinner and not just about giving an opinion about the restaurant because it was kind of open-ended.
Mhm.
So we try our best to create prompts that kids could handle in different directions and not just this is how you have to do it kind of thing, so that students can be creative or they can just react in a very authentic way.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that from the rest of the panel? Okay. So just I think this one became clear as the webinar progressed, but just to make sure it was abundantly clear, how many rubrics are there for part 4?
I can answer. So currently, there are two. There is the category 1-2 languages. So this will be French, Spanish, and Italian. And we also have a rubric for category 3-4 languages, and this is only for Chinese at this point. Anything related to ASL, we don't have anything for that yet. So,
Okay, so for French, Italian, and Spanish, there is only one rubric that they will use to grade both Part 4A and Part 4B.
yes.
Correct,
And they'll just use the same rubric twice.
correct.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay.
And also depending upon what we get from the state referencing ASL, it may be identical to the one that we have for Chinese, because that is a category 3-4, as is ASL. But if there is something specific that they're looking for, then we may have a difference and you would have your own rubric for ASL for presentational.
Very nice. Very nice. Yes. With absent the guidance on ASL from SED at the moment, we can't say for sure or not whether we'll have an additional rubric for ASL. It would be nice to be simple and have it overlap with Chinese, but we don't know yet.
That would be nice.
The next question deals with multiple time frames. They are referenced on the rubric, and just wanted to clarify, are students required to use multiple time frames in their answers and their responses? And the answer may change. I'm not saying it does, but it might be a category 1-2 response and a category 3-4 response. I'm just reminding you of that, and I'm not sure if it matters.
It really depends on what the student is writing about, right? If they decide to do the story and they're making a story up about what's happening at the moment, but then they want to refer to what happened prior to the picture or after, then by definition, those tenses would have to be adjusted, right?
Yep, definitely. So that's one of the things I wrote is, it depends on what the student's actually trying to say in their response. But I think the question was more focused on as a general rule, is it required that students use multiple time frames in their response? And as a general rule, your answer would be
No.
Correct. I think it would be the present tense. The state has said at checkpoint B that the present tense should be well known and a student can operate within it with ease. Whereas in other tenses, such as the past tense or the future tenses, they may be able to work within those parameters, but they may make mistakes. It would be expected that they would be making mistakes in those timeframes. That's not to say that they can't use them. And as Swaza said earlier, if they've chosen to use something that references the past, then they would be using the past that they know.
But I
so a
also,
student that should help a student be a little more comfortable when they're telling their story, knowing that if I'm stretching my abilities here by telling something in the past or in the future, and I don't definitely know how to say it, but I know I can get the gist of it across, that's actually a perfect score,
Yes.
right? Whereas if I only write in the present, then I'm actually expected to be largely perfect. And if I make mistakes in the present, it'll hurt me more than it would be if it was expressing in the past or the future.
Oh, definitely. The present tense is a much lower level than working in an upper level tense.
Yeah. Lou, I cut you off. Go ahead.
I was going to also say, our prompt, we are very conscious when we're writing our prompts to make sure that we're not pushing a student into using a certain tense. So, for example, our prompt could be neutral enough about talking about going to a restaurant. And if the student decided to write about last week he went to the restaurant, or next week he will go to the restaurant. So our prompt allows students to decide on what time frame they want to handle and not push them into a definite past tense.
Very good. Before I go on to my next question, Dana, if you wouldn't mind, could you find the actual URL to Frontline for
Sure.
today's program and put that into the chat? We have one of our guests who is struggling to use the QR code, and the URL just make it easier.
Yeah,
And
no
maybe for
problem.
other people too. So we talked about time frames. I think this was more explicitly addressed after it was asked, but I think it's worth doubling down on just for clarification purposes. For completion of task, which scores are permissible?
For completion of,
Which number-based scores are permissible?
Two,
What
four,
can
six.
right,
Zero
six.
as well, but I mean, if it's zero,
Right.
then it's zero for the whole thing. But
and so
really,
what and so if you're caught in between and you really want to give a 3 or a 5 or a 1,
you
cannot.
cannot. Then just err in the
Cannot.
in the
So that's where you do the lean. Does
Yeah,
it
the
lean
lean.
more this way or does it lean more that way?
right.
and what if
All
it's
right.
perpendicular?
Then you flip a coin.
Err on the side of the student. Err on the side of the
Always.
student.
So if you are this way, that way, you are going to, for the entire group of students you're grading, you're going to have the same perspective, or you're going to find the same balance in how you do it.
Lou, I'm glad you mentioned that the disinterested teacher has been removed from all 4+1 pathways at this point in time. So you do not have to have a disinterested teacher. It's still advised. It's an excellent way of grading. It's non-committal, but it is something that you do not have to do anymore. So teachers can correct their own papers.
That's correct. What preparation did the students who wrote the samples we used, what preparation did they have?
None to our knowledge. Just whatever classroom experience they have had. They were given to the teachers on very short notice, and the teachers were very kind enough to fit them into their schedules. So I would say none to minimal.
Right. And maybe did the teachers for a very short amount of time, because they were local students to our BOCES, have knowledge of the rubrics associated, or at least a draft version of the rubrics?
Don't remember if they had a draft version. They may have from one of our network meetings. Dana, do you recall offhand?
I can't remember if they had them yet or not.
If they
Yeah,
did, it would have
that's
been
a
very
little fuzzy for
limited,
me.
very limited access. No
Yeah.
significant amount of professional development, or
No.
it would have
No,
been
not
very
at that
raw.
point, no.
Okay. So
Because we hadn't
the students were not explicitly prepared for completing these tasks. They were simply voluntold by their teachers. We're gonna participate in this
do
activity.
this today, right?
Yes. All right.
Right.
So suffice it to say that with prior knowledge and preparation, students probably would perform even better than the ones that we showed today and the ones we didn't show today, like Swaz talked
Right.
about.
Mhm.
Right.
Very good.
But it was a beautiful set of papers that we received, given that we had a really nice bell curve involved from the high to the low. And as Swaz already stated, we selected those that we felt would give you the best information as to how to grade a mediocre paper, how to grade a poor paper, because as Lou said, the easy papers are easy to grade. All right. They just leap off the page at you and say, oh, this is great, you know. And that's when you sit back and you say, oh, somebody, thank God, was listening to me. You know, I mean, that makes you feel good when you get those kind of papers.
Yes, very good. A couple more questions, but before we go to those, Dana, could you put our contact information back up in case
Oh,
someone
sure.
wants to reach out to us with explicit questions following the presentation?
There it is.
Can one of you, or maybe it's a multi-pronged answer, describe why it is that we don't use 1, 3, 5 scores for completion of task and half points for the other dimensions of the rubric?
First of all, we wanted to make it is user-friendly for the teacher. Okay, at some point you have to make a decision. Is it a 6? Is it a 4? If we put a 5 in the middle of it, then you're going to be saying, is it a 6 to a 5? Is it a 5 to a 4? So more divisions mean more decision making, number one. And we also, for the ease of points, if there, the 15 points is worked out well by having the 3 different columns and doubling the accomplishment of the purpose of the task, which is always much more important than whether I have accuracy of language.
Mhm.
I mean, that is the way the state is moving. So we are trying to incorporate in our test the design of the state, the desire of the state.
And as far as half points are concerned, there was a time when the state did have half points. It was a nightmare to count half points. There was a time when the state actually counted an accent mark, a wrong accent mark, any diacritical mark, a half point, and you had to circle them and go back and count them all up. It was just, it added time to the correction process, and we didn't have enough rating time to be able to do that. So that's another reason why there's no half points.
I'll also add to the discussion that the points themselves, well, they obviously add up to or help accumulate to a final score for the exam. On the specific parts of the test that use the rubrics, they directly correlate to a proficiency level, which is kind of the point of giving this assessment, is to determine at what level the student has progressed in their sequence of coursework. At this point, it's a one-time assessment, and so to put a number on it is one thing, but to put an actual label on it, the student is mostly intermediate low, or mostly intermediate mid when it comes to their ability to engage in presentational communication, is a very useful moment in time, a snapshot of their abilities to judge on where they might move forward or where they might need more help. Is the expectation still that it has to be understood by a native speaker with grammatical errors?
It doesn't have to be understood by a native speaker. You want to be understood by somebody used to communicating with intermediate level learners. So really, if you think about it, who is most used to communicating with intermediate level learners? Teachers who teach students that are performing at intermediate level. So if you can understand it, that's what you're really going by, people that are used to that level of learner.
Yeah,
But you
and on
do
the
wanna
opposite
make
end
the
of the spectrum, you've got the native speakers who are extremely fluent with the language, who might struggle a little bit to understand someone who makes some mistakes, especially in the present, or maybe the past or future tenses. But on the other end of the spectrum from there is your people who are used to communicating with novice level learners, your checkpoint A students. These are people who be very experienced with understanding and expecting errors and getting right over them because they know where they're going to come, right? So the intermediate level teacher is somewhere in the middle, who might not easily or as easily get over the errors you make, but can probably figure them out, compared to the heritage speaker, who would be like, what are you talking about? So, that's where the intermediate lies, and that's where the checkpoint B is.
That is what I was going to say, is that when you are grading a checkpoint B paper, you have to keep in mind that you are an intermediate teacher and you're not a checkpoint A teacher. So when you see an error that is checkpoint A error, it should be a glaring error to you, not oh, I see, I understand what they're trying to say.
But with that, thank you everyone for attending today. A large amount of thanks to the panelists who presented today, who have spent, Lou wasn't kidding, I think it was Lou, years in getting to this point, right? This doesn't happen overnight, and it has to sequence back to checkpoint A, and everything has to flow from one level to the next. And we have to be looking forward as well to college level, checkpoint C level courses, and putting it all together with student samples and rubrics and prompts and state guidelines and proficiency levels and everything in between, it has been a mountain or more than one, and the work that you do doesn't go unnoticed, and it's very much appreciated. So thank you all. Great job.
Hey, just to
And
close, can I just point out that on the current slide, there's of course our contact information, but also the a link to the website, right? And if people are a little bored this summer or they need a refresher, all these webinars are recorded and you can go check them out at your leisure.
And we look forward to seeing you next year when we will have more webinars supporting supporting our exams and those schools that elect to use them. Thank you all for attending. Have a great evening.